your GoToMeeting console on the right-hand side there on your screen, and you can ask any of those questions and type those in, and we'll do our best to stay on time and answer all those questions that you have. If we can't get to all of your questions, we'll be sure to follow up with an email. Now, a couple of other things also is that we have a survey that's going to be asked right after the webinar, so we just ask that you take a minute or two to fill that out. That would just be real helpful, to us and for us going forward as well. And then we're going to have a couple of polls, 3 actually, throughout the presentation, so be sure to participate in the polls as well. So once again, I'd just like to introduce Chris Chase, our managing partner. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for being with us today.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate the introduction. So again, we're going to talk today about Essbase calculations, and as an agenda, I'll give you just a little bit of a background on kind of where I'm coming from. I'll talk a bit about different types of calculations you can perform in Essbase, give you some samples, and talk about some of the considerations that you might want to think about as you're writing those calculations. Then I'll talk about planning calculations, which are called business rules, and talk a little bit about what makes them different from just straight Essbase calculations. And then I'll talk about just a few other interesting topics that come up quite frequently when you talk about Essbase calculations. So just a little bit of background, my perspective. I have an engineering degree, spent about 6 or 7 years doing medical device, working in the medical device field, doing software programming in that area, as well as doing some back office ERP development back before there was such a thing as J.D. Edwards and those sorts of things. Got into the implementation side of things, working with Hyperion Essbase about a little over 10 years ago now. I'm currently on the board of directors of the Rocky Mountain Oracle User Group, serving as their director for the Hyperion EPM SIG, and I'm also on the board of directors of the Colorado Oracle Application User Group. The Bean Consulting Group, just real quickly, we're an Oracle Gold partner specializing in Essbase and planning. We implement solutions for planning both on-prem and in the cloud, lots of Essbase reporting solutions, financial management, that sort of thing, and we have experience in a number of different verticals there. Just a little bit of background before we get into Essbase for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Essbase or that sort of thing. Today, right, a lot of people continue to use Excel spreadsheets and other sorts of systems for doing planning and budgeting and that sort of thing. When you're using Excel for that sort of stuff, you wind up with data quality issues, and it really doesn't stand the test of true auditability and security and that kind of thing in today's world. The other problem with using Excel models and that sort of thing is you wind up with sort of these disconnected models, right? You might have certain models that are top-down, looking at things from a strategic target standpoint, and then other things that are bottom-up, driver-based plan sorts of things that work from the bottom up, and how do those things align if they're in different spreadsheets and they're not really tied together. And lastly, one of the other issues related to using Excel models and that sort of thing is the amount of time that people can spend actually doing analysis. When you're using Excel for this sort of for these sorts of things, quite a bit amount of time is spent distributing and collecting information in the Excel sheets, consolidating the results, reviewing the results before you can actually spend any time analyzing and coming up with plans of action. So Essbase and planning, right, provides a configurable and scalable platform that allows you to solve some of those problems. Gives you robust reporting and analysis, really easy to use and quick to implement, and it does have security and auditability that we need in today's world. Just a little bit of background on Essbase and relational databases. So Essbase really is a multi-dimensional database and stores data in what are called cubes or dimensional arrays, or however you want to think of it. But the data is structured in a very different way than data is stored in a relational database. And it's designed for different things, right? An OLAP or multi-dimensional database is really designed for doing analysis and being able to drill down and pivot on data and be able to do analysis kind of at the speed of thought, if you will. Relational databases typically are designed more for transactional processing and are normalized and that sort of thing to manage pushing many transactions through a relational system in a short amount of time, but not designed for really doing analysis. You have to write really complex queries on relational databases to kind of get your data out, and that can be problematic from a performance standpoint as well. So how do we kind of bring these two things together? And the way I think about it is a multi-dimensional or OLAP database has dimensions, and those dimensions map into what I think of as the chart string from a typical ERP system, right? So an ERP system might break down its chart string into a general ledger account, a year and a period when the transaction occurred. And in this case, what I'm showing is maybe a product and a store that the expense or revenue generated out of. And you see there below kind of the codes that would fit into those different what we call dimensions. And so these things then typically map into dimensions. So I have a store dimension, a product dimension, an account dimension, and so on and so forth. So with that as a little bit of a backdrop, we'll take our first poll that Jim mentioned. Which asks what kind of, are you currently using Essbase, and if so, how are you using it? And as soon as we get get some results in here, I'll go ahead and share those results. Just give you guys a few more seconds here to answer. All right. Go ahead and close the poll here in a couple more seconds. All right. And we'll go ahead and share those results with you guys. So it looks like quite a few of you are both planning and Essbase users. Nobody's using Essbase Studio today. It's kind of interesting. It's the new direction that Oracle's going with Essbase, and provides some really interesting features in terms of doing drill down reporting and that kind of thing. And a few of you looks like not using Essbase at all. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and move on here then. So let's start to talk about Essbase calcs a little bit. As I talk through the calculations here, what we'll talk about, I'll try to provide some samples. It might be code, potentially hierarchies in terms of how we achieve the results of the calculation, and I will try to show results as much as I can. When you're creating calculations in Essbase, there are kind of three different ways you can do it. You can use the hierarchy operators to perform kind of the more basic calculations, although you can achieve some more complex things using just the hierarchy consolidation operators. The next is using what are called member formulas, which is a little more complicated and allows you a little more flexibility and access to functionality within Essbase. And then the last is calculation scripts, which allows you to do even more complex things. When you are considering each of those, you want to definitely think about performance and which of those you choose will affect performance, and also how the application design might be impacted by certain choices as you work through that as well. There are both commands and functions available in Essbase. Functions are very much like Excel-based functions, average, and so on and so forth. And commands allow you to do a bit more focused calculations and write customized code. So the first example here, the first option that we talked about is using hierarchies as a way to perform calculations. So in this case, we're looking at revenue as the example. It's price times quantity, and you can see here we've used the multiplication and addition operators within the outline to calculate revenue, and it's using dynamic calc in this case. And you can see the result here, right? Price 10, quantity, or price 30, quantity 10 yields a revenue of 300. Very, very simple, very basic example. Next option is using, again, what are called member formulas. In this case, the calculation resides kind of within the outline, and it's accessed through member properties. So you can see here, that's how you access it. You then have access to all the outline structures and all the various functions that might be available within Essbase. Again, very basic example here. We're looking at profit margin, which is net income divided by revenue. So in this case, right, our profit margin is 66.67%. A couple of things to bear in mind when you're using member formulas. You can't use all of the calc script syntax. You can't use commands within member formulas. And you also want to be very cognizant of performance impacts. If you don't narrow a calculation sometimes, and that calculation runs across the entire database and it's dynamic calc, and you have a very large report, for example, you might be able to bring your report server down. And then the last option for creating calculations or calculation scripts, right? You access that through EAS. In this case, the screenshots I'm showing here, rather than Essbase Studio. In this case, we're looking at calculating earnings per share, which is our net income times our shares outstanding. Again, very, very simple example here, but just to kind of get the idea of the various options that are available for you to write calculations within Essbase. Now, when you write calculations, a lot of times you also want to be able to roll all your data up the outline. That's one of the big benefits of using an OLAP database is the speed and performance at which you can aggregate and roll these things up. And there are two different ways you can roll data up within your outline. One is using what's called the agg command, and the other is using what's called the calcdim command. An agg command operates only on sparse dimensions. It's only going to aggregate the data. It will not calculate any member formulas. Typically runs faster than a calcdim when you have less than about 6 levels within the dimension that you're aggregating. And it will not calculate any level 0 members. Conversely, the calcdim can work on either a sparse or a dense dimension. Tends to be faster when you have more than 6 levels within the dimension that you're calculating. It will both aggregate and calculate member formulas, and it can recalculate level 0 members if needed as well. So just a couple of examples here of how the command is used in a calc script. The first one here, agg, we're going to agg our location and year dimensions. In this case, you can see that location is dense, so the agg command actually shows us an error here. So that's the sort of thing you would see if you actually did try to agg a dense dimension. And then calcdim accounts here down below. In both cases, the command calculates or aggregates the data in the order that the dimensions are specified if you're calling out multiple dimensions in the command. Some things to consider during aggregation for aggregation purposes. The biggest one a lot of times is your dense and sparse settings if you're using BSO. If you're using member formulas, they can definitely impact your overall performance, again, depending on how well you might narrowly focus that member formula. And then also your data storage. If you're using dynamic calc on sparse dimensions, you can really run into big problems that way. We had a client at one point, I recall, who had a very large sparse dimension, had made all of their roll-ups dynamic calc across the entire sparse dimension, and their ag for the database was taking over 24 hours, which, you know, in a real world doesn't work very well if you're looking at daily loads. We came in and evaluated the system and recommended that they switch all of these dynamic calc operators to store, and lo and behold, their aggregation took less than 10 minutes after doing that. So you can see very, very significant degradation if you do that sort of thing. Some of the other things to consider for aggregation purposes is your dimension order. Again, this is talking about BSO. You want to use what's called an hourglass design if you can, which is starting with your largest dense dimensions on the top of your outline, going down to your smallest dense dimensions, then starting with your smallest sparse dimensions and going out to your largest sparse dimensions. There's also what's called hourglass on a stick, which moves all of your non-aggregating sparse dimensions to the bottom of the hierarchy. So things like scenario and version, which typically are not dimensions that might not be aggregated, you move those to the bottom of the hierarchy. And always remember, you can't fix on a dimension and then aggregate it. So always remember that. And two-pass calc we'll talk about here in a second is one of the other things you want to think about in aggregation. Right, so a lot of times we have data that might need to be forced more than once. So if we think about a percentage of revenue or something like that at a rolled up level, we don't really want to see that percentage as a sum of all the children of those percentages, but we really want to truly see that percentage as a calculation of the two pieces of data that are used to calculate that percentage at a lower level. A couple of other things to bear in mind: you can only use two-pass on the count dimension, and the members should be dynamic calc or dynamic calc and store. So just as an example here, profit percentage is profit divided by sales. And if you do not use the two-pass calc, kind of the order of operation occurs, right? We calculate profit percentage as profit divided by sales for each period, so January, February, March are the first three. And then quarter one, well, we haven't actually rolled up profit or sales for quarter one yet, so it initially comes back with a percentage of 0. Then we go ahead and roll up our quarters, right? So profit gets rolled up, sales gets rolled up, and then we roll up profit, which is the sum of those percentages, which gives us 125%, which is not the right result. The correct result we would get by adding that two-pass, and what happens is that whenever it's two-pass, it comes back and recalculates that value then based on what's occurred after the roll-up of your time dimension. So once we've rolled those things up and we actually have a value in Q1 and Q2 for profit and sales, we go back and recalculate profit percentage as 42%. So there's all kinds of driver-based calculations you can do within Essbase. I'm not going to get into all of these, but I will suffice it to say that there are a multitude of functions that are available in Essbase that you can use to achieve these sorts of things. I'm just going to talk about a very basic driver-based calc here. Again, hopefully just kind of get the point across, and then obviously you can layer things onto this sort of example to get more and more complex. In this case, again, we're just doing a very simple driver-based rate times quantity type of calculation. So we do unit times price, 10 units, price of 30, gives us a revenue of 300. Allocations are another big calculation that's done quite often in Essbase. And really the best way to achieve an allocation is to use the allocate function. The 4 required parameters are the amount, the allocation range, the basis, and the method that you want to use to do your allocation. So as an example here, we're going to calculate our budget by allocating our total budget funds across all of the children of total funds using a share basis of our prior actual year. So we're going to use a prior actual year's fund percentage as a percent of total to calculate our budget. Another one of the really powerful commands that's available in Essbase, or the 2 types of commands, are your if statement and your fix statement, which allow you to do conditional sorts of things and narrow the focus of your calculation. The if performs a conditional test on data, right, and is Boolean, and you need to create a calc block within your calc script if you're going to use an if statement. Fix statement allows you to restrict your database down to a more narrow data set, and has an infix. So fix infix is a block that would end your narrowing of focus. And always remember, you can't use fixed statements within a member formula. So, and also remember, if on dense, fix on sparse. That's the old adage to remember. So again, just looking at this if statement here in a little more detail, right? We're using calculating tax using a progressive tax scale. So if our revenue is less than or equal to 50, we get taxed at a 15% rate. Between 50 and 75%, we get taxed at a 25% rate. Between 75 and 100, we get taxed at a 30% rate, and anything over 100 is taxed at a 35% rate. As an example, I will point out that this could be tuned a little bit more. My last else if here, I really could just make an else, because I've already determined that any other value is already greater than 100, because I've checked to see if it's less than or equal to 50, between 50 and 75, between 75 and 100. So I already know everything at that point as I move down through my if and if-else sequence. I already know that everything is greater than 100 at that point, so I don't really need to check it. So I could improve the performance of this by taking that last else if out and just making it an else. And you can see here kind of how the tax gets calculated as a result. Right, as our revenue grows from month to month, our tax increases. The fixed statement, as we mentioned, kind of restricts calculations, and in this simple example here, we're restricting our calculation to just the actual scenario. We're calculating the account dimension, and you can see in the results here, right, our budget scenario doesn't really have any data in it. The account dimension hasn't been rolled up. We haven't calculated revenue here, but we have for the actual scenario. So that's kind of how Fix allows you to narrow that stuff down. Data export's a real powerful command. It's one of the only ways you have to get data out of Essbase other than using Smart View to retrieve your data and pull it out. When you use the data export command, you can either export the data to a file, or you can export it directly into a relational database if you want to have a little bit tighter integration with the target that you are trying to export the data to. One of the other big things that we need to do a lot of times is to do time shifting or shifting of data across dimensions. excuse me. We use MD shift to shift data across multiple dimensions. So in this, we can, using MD shift, you can shift a previous year's value into a current year or that sort of thing without having to write additional script. You can achieve the same thing with at prior, and we'll show you both examples here. Right, at prior allows you to return some prior member of a dimension that you're looking at, and you can specify which prior member you want to pull from that dimension. In order to do real time shifting and that kind of thing with the at prior, though, you have to write a little bit more code, and we'll show that here. So here's an example of the MD shift. In this case, right, we're taking or we're calculating our opening inventory using our ending inventory from the prior period. So in this case, right, and it shifts across multiple dimensions. So in this case, we're shifting across both our year and period dimensions and making the opening inventory in January of 2012 equal to our ending inventory in December of 2011. Similar way to achieve the same thing is to use at prior. Again, you got to write a little bit more code to do that, but and it will perform, not quite as well, but sometimes a little bit easier to understand what's happening with this one, right? So what we want to do, if it's January, then we want to pull December of the prior year, and otherwise, if it's not January, then we want to pull the prior month, and so this will go ahead and roll our opening inventory into our ending inventory for each period. And again, you can kind of see how that works, right? Our ending inventory in November is 190, rolls up to opening inventory in December, and so on and so forth there. One of the other very powerful features within Essbase is the notion of what are called user-defined attributes. They're essentially tags you can put on members that allow you to filter those members down. You assign UDAs by going to the member properties, going to the UDA tab, and assigning the attributes or the UDAs there. And there are two main functions you can use for UDAs. The first is @UDA, which returns all the members with the specified UDA. So in this example, in both cases, we're going to look at doing a sign flip using UDAs as a method of identifying which accounts should be sign flipped. So in the first example, we use the fix statement and fix on all those accounts that have a UDA of revenue. We then multiply our actuals times -1 to do a sign flip on our actual data for any account that is tagged as revenue. Same exact thing we're achieving in the bottom one, but we're using the @IsUDA function in this case. And you have both of them because you can't always just fix down necessarily, and a lot of times you may need to do more conditional checking than just whether the UDA is set. So that's where the @IsUDA might come in handy as well. It returns a true value, so it returns a Boolean if the UDA exists for the specified members. So in this case, we're fixing on all our level 0 accounts, and then we create a calc block and check to see if any of the accounts are tagged with @IsUDA revenue. So any accounts that are tagged with a revenue UDA, we do a sign flip in that case. So two different ways to skin that cat. There are also attributes, which are attribute dimensions you can assign to members as well, or to dimensions. This allows you to do a bit more complex reporting, as well as filter data sets for calculations. The attribute dimensions allow you to do cross-tab reporting, so that's where you might use an attribute rather than a UDA. If you had the choice between the two, there is obviously a little bit more overhead than with the attribute. But in this case here, we're looking at sort of different levels of sales and calculating bonuses on for our sales team based on their level of sales, and where you want to be able to kind of track our sales reps on our rows and our different bonus scales across the columns. So we have, high sales, medium sales, low sales that get different bonus calculations. And in this case, our bonus is calculated as, an additional 15% of the original bonus for people who have a high, have achieved a high sales mark. There are a number of other functions you can use with attributes. I won't go into all of these, but just want to point those out. So let's talk about planning business rules a little bit. Right, what are they? They're really just Essbase calculations with kind of some special capabilities or characteristics. The biggest one being that it allows for what are called runtime prompts, which allow you to prompt a user at runtime when you run the calculation for some dimension member that allows you to narrow the focus of that calculation. Business rules also use sort of some building blocks, similar to object-oriented programming, I might say, or not exactly, but similar. But it allows you to have some building blocks that allow you to reuse certain components and leverage them over and over again, and only have to change them in one place. Prior to version 11.1.1, all of your business rules were written just in EAS. And the business rule manager portion of EAS, after 11.1.1 and between 11.1.2.2 version of planning, you sort of had the option of picking whether you wanted to use EAS or Calc Manager. Your option was limited a little bit depending on whether you chose to use Classic or EPMA for your application builds, and whether or not you were using some of the planning modules that Oracle provides with planning. But as of version 11.1.2.2, EAS is no longer supported for business rules. All business rules are done in Calculation Manager now. And one of the other calculations that comes in a lot of times in planning is because you have multiple cubes that you need to keep data synchronized. There are some special calculation functions or calcs that you might want to consider in order to assist with that. So how do you access Calculation Manager? Well, once you've navigated into the workspace, you go to Administer, Calc Manager, brings up the Calculation Manager tab within your workspace, and then you can drill down into your planning applications and get down to the calculations, rule, scripts, templates, formulas, all that stuff that you might have down there. On the EAS side, and I'll kind of show the Calc Manager side and EAS side for a few of these things. So for EAS, right, you go to the business rules area within EAS, and then you can, again, drill down and see your different rules, sequences, macros, that kind of thing. You have kind of two options available to you to write calc scripts or business rules. You have the graphical option and the script option. Right? Graphical is more of a kind of a flow chart method within the rule designer. You have some wizards that allow you to simplify the process of building those scripts. It's very drag and drop, but that's what I might call a little bit of limited functionality because you can't performance tune it and certain other things. On the script side, right, you really own the code. You go in and write it. It's a little more flexible and provides a little bit more ability to customize. So with that, we're going to ask our second poll question. We'll leave the poll open here for few seconds, allow people to get their votes in. And again, we'll share the results of the poll here when we close it. We'll let that poll go for just another 5 or 10 seconds here. All right, just a couple more seconds. We'll go ahead and close the poll here. And we'll share the results with you guys. All right, so we can see, most everybody, 85% prefer to really own the code and write their own script. That's not uncommon. I wouldn't, not surprised by that. All right, so if we move on then, this kind of gives you an idea of, again, kind of what the graphical view of the calc managers look like. And this is, what the script side of it would look like if you were actually writing the code. Again, on the EAS side, graphical versus source code. So when we talk about those business rule structures that I was talking about, those building blocks, the lowest level building block you have is what are called formulas, and they're little snippets of code that you might want to reuse all the time. So the example I was giving of maybe price times quantity, where you might use that all over the place. You don't want to have to go, if for some reason your calculation for revenue were to change and not become price times quantity, you wouldn't want to have to go and change that in 100 different places. You want to change it in one place. So formula allows you to do that kind of thing. You can then reuse those formulas in your business rules and sequences and that kind of thing. Business rules, as we mentioned, are just, again, those special calc scripts that have some of the functionality like runtime prompts and that sort of thing. And then rule sets allow you to sequence your business rules and run a number of business rules in sequence. So I might have 3 or 4 business rules that I want to run one right after the other. I can sequence those together. And templates allow you to kind of build more custom sorts of calculations, and it's a new feature in Calc Manager. Again, just to show you a screenshot, this is what formulas look like when you go and write them in Calc Manager. And one thing I will point out too, right, formulas are akin to macros in the EAS side. I'm not going to show the EAS side of these, but formulas are kind of akin to what macros were in EAS when business rules were in EAS. And rule sets are akin to sequences, again, back in the old EAS days. I guess it wasn't that long ago, but. And again, here's, kind of what sequences look like in Calc Manager and how you can put them in order and that sort of thing. So runtime prompts, I've mentioned those a few times. Right, they are prompts that can be launched at runtime when the business rule gets run. It asks prompts a user to enter a value and then allows you to focus your calculation down so that you only run it for that particular thing that the user has selected. In order to create your runtime prompts in Calc Manager, you want to go to your Tools menu, go to Variables. Then once you've gotten into your variables, you'll see all of your different business rules listed there once you get down into your planning application or database. And you'll then see all the variables for a particular business rule that you have selected there. You can add more more runtime prompts there, or that sort of thing. The variables can be of different types. You can prompt users for a single member or multiple members. You can prompt them for integer values that might align with a smart list, text, and that sort of thing. When you want to run business rules within a planning application, there are kind of two ways to do it interactively. And there's a third way, kind of just through tools and running business rules manually. But more interactively, you can run them through web forms. The first one is to attach your business rule to your web form. Right, so you go to your web form manager, attach your rule. Once you've attached the rule, you then have some options that allow you to define whether you want that rule to run every time someone clicks save on the web form, whether or not you want to use members that are selected on the web form to narrow your focus, and whether you want to hide the prompt and that sort of thing. The other option for running business rules more interactively in a planning app is to use menus. In order to create the menu, you go to Manage, Administration, Manage Menus. You get to your menu administration page where you can edit your menus. You can add a menu item then, and you want to specify the business rule as the type of menu item. You can then specify what business rule it is and how you want it to launch and that sort of thing. Once you've created the menu, you then attach the menu to your web form through the options panel of your web form developer. And once you've done that, if you right-click on that web form, the menu adds that business rule as an option that can be run that way. This is nice if you don't want to run every time someone clicks save, but you want it to be a little bit more on demand. One of the other things I talked about was wanting to keep data integrated between plan types, or keep data in sync between plan types if you're using a planning application. And planning typically, excuse me, the default behavior for creating that integration within planning is it will create what are called dynamic XREF calculations if you use accounts across multiple plan types. And the way that works is it's kind of a pull mechanism for pulling data in. So right in this case, total tuition is what we want in our consolidated cube, and in order to get that updated, we make a call on total total tuition in that cube, which goes out to our revenue cube, which has detail about total tuition, and pulls just that bottom total tuition value and pulls it back into our consolidated cube. Problem with that can be, we don't always know when things are getting updated over here in the revenue cube, so we don't know quite when to call that XREF on the console side to go and force that update. So you can wind up where at certain times things in the revenue cube might be a little bit different than the console cube if you haven't forced that synchronization. The other mechanism, and this is new in version 11, is the XWrite, which allows you to do more of a push kind of integration. Right, in this case, same example, we're taking total tuition from revenue and pushing it into console. In this case, we can force this to happen every time and any time something gets updated in the revenue cube. So in this case, we know that something's changing. We can force the update in console, and it will allow us to keep things in sync a little bit better. There are a number of other UDAs that are available in planning. I won't go into these in great detail, but suffice it to say you have, along with the some of the other attributes you can assign, you can use this no-link and UDF to manage how those XREF and how that integration is done between plan types. And then there are some other UDAs that allow manage some of the reporting that you might see. So right, you have revenue UDAs, for example, that are assigned using properties in planning, which drive how certain things are calculated. So Last section here, we'll get into a couple of other interesting topics. One of the biggest ones that comes up a lot is block creation, right? I write a calculation, I run the calculation, and I don't see any result in the intersection I'm expecting to see data. Could be a block creation issue, and there are a number of different ways, some better than others, how you can manage trying to resolve that. The first and perhaps best way within a calculation is to put the sparse dimension on the left-hand side of your equal sign in an equation. So sparse dimension equals something, it will force the block to be created for that sparse dimension number. You can use the at I was just talking about, using this loopback functionality, which will force blocks to be created. You can use the set create non-missing block command. So if you set that on, any blocks, any potential blocks that need to be created would be created within that section of code where you've turned that on. I will caution, be very careful in using this. You can see very, very serious performance degradation in your calculations where calcs that once took 5 minutes will take hours if you turn the set create non-missing block on. You can also use data copy, which will create blocks, and you can also try to seed your anticipated intersections if you want, using constants or something like that. One of the other interesting things that comes up a lot of times that we need to use in Essbase calcs are what are called cross-dimensional operators. Very similar or akin to what are called absolute references in Excel. It's a little $sign reference in Excel. Essbase will default to a relative reference if you do not absolute reference. So in our example here, we're calculating shipping, but we want to use a global rate for shipping. We don't want, and our shipping is calculated across as a function of our, percentage function of our sales. But we don't want to have it vary across our different stores and our different locations and companies and so on and so forth. So from a forecasting perspective, we just want to kind of use a global rate. So down here, as we calculate shipping equals sales times our shipping percentage, when that global rate is stored at no location, no company, which is kind of our global or absolute reference there. And then it's calculated across all of our locations and all of our companies. Another one that comes up occasionally in planning is the implied share, where you have a single child under a parent, or only one child that consolidates up to the parent. What happens is a lot of times you'll put data into the child, look at the aggregate things up, go and look, and the data at the child level is gone, and that's because the parent value has pushed back down onto the child. That's that implied share. The way to prevent that from occurring is to make the parent a never share, and then that will prevent that implied share from occurring if you have that situation. And then lastly, performance tuning. Right, there are caches you can set within Essbase. I'm not going to get into explaining how to optimize your cache settings. There are far too many variables that play into that to provide any silver bullet, but suffice it to say there are index caches and data file caches that can be set that can have a tremendous impact on your overall performance of your application. And then custom defined functions. You can create things outside of Essbase written in Java that you can load into Essbase and call from within your Essbase script. And that's it. Appreciate your time. Let's see if we have any questions.
Well, thanks, Chris. Really appreciate your time as well. I know that you've got a busy schedule and you're getting ready to pack your bags to head out to Oracle Open World. So once again, thanks for joining us. And for those of you out there, please feel free to ask Chris any questions. Chris has been in this business for 25 plus years, and he's an expert both in Essbase planning and really the whole umbrella of Hyperion products. So this is your chance. You've got one of the best in the business to ask a question at this point. One of the things I do want to mention as well is, we're going to be at Oracle Open World, so come out and visit us. That would be great. We're going to be residing on Russian Hill, so that's going to be the section that we're going to be at, and it looks like there's going to be a party as well on Tuesday night at this location. So email us and we can give you the address and let you know where we're going to be. Also, we've got a number of webinars that we have planned, so be sure to check our website and feel free to sign up for additional webinars. The next one that we're going to be updating as of today, in fact, is going to be the generation and transmission webinar that we're going to be giving out. So it looks like we've got a couple of questions coming in. Okay, so the first question I have is, can dynamic time series be used within a planning business rule?
Can dynamic time series be used within a planning business rule? It can be referenced in a planning business rule. Obviously, the calculation of it, is done dynamically through using the dynamic time series properties, but you can reference the values of a dynamic time series within a calc script, yes.
Okay. The next question I have here is, a planning app gets stuck and the EAS SVR process keeps running even if the Essbase service is stopped. What could be the probable reasons?
Wow, there's a lot of possible reasons for that. If it's a planning app, there could be issues with the relational database side potentially. These things can be impacted by the report server as well. So there are a number of different things that could play into that.
Okay, and if you want some follow-up on that, feel free to contact us. We'll definitely can look more into that.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, so this is an easy one. I think I can handle this one. So was the session recorded, and will the presentation be made available for reference? Yes, we have recorded this, and we can definitely do that. So I'll have your contact information, so anybody that would like the recording, please feel free to reach out to me and or Chris. So Chris, if you could put your contact information out there, that would be great. But again, yeah, feel free to email us and we can get a copy of this webinar for you. Okay, I'll give 30 more seconds for asking any more questions. Right now it looks like we've got all the questions covered, so if there are any more questions out there for Chris or for the Bean Consulting Group, feel free to reach out to us. And then also, if you have questions that after this webinar that you might think of, again, we've got Chris's contact information out there, so feel free to shoot us an email and ask a question to us, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Well, it looks like those are the questions that we have at this point in time. Once again, if you're out in Oracle Open World, feel free to look us up and we can grab a coffee or lunch. That would be great. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to sign up for the additional webinars that we have. Really appreciate your time today. And once again, Chris, I know you've got a busy schedule, and thanks for taking your time out to be with us today as well.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks,